back to the show. Today we have Alma Marston. She's the CEO of Marston Consulting, author of Type R, Transformative Resilience for Thriving in a Turbulent World. Alma, welcome back to the show.
Hi, good to see you, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on again. I think we had a really good conversation last time, kind of around all the stuff you're doing. But maybe before we get into that fun stuff, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure. So I mostly grew up on the west coast of the U.S.
Okay.
I have the benefit of being part country mouse, part city mouse.
Nice.
So got the best of both worlds from that.
Okay, so walk us through kind of your career journey, maybe some highlights up until kind of what you're doing now, and then we'll dive into that.
Sure. I guess it's fair to say that I'm a person that's had a bit of a zigzag career, or I've made my own path, should I say. So for years, early on, I worked for different nonprofits on some of the big global issues that, frame the challenges that we're talking about today, whether it's economic inequality, climate change, gender equality. And then I got a master's degree at Columbia in international affairs and kind of changed directions a little bit more to look at things like finance and the impact of economic policy, and eventually moved over here to London. Along the way, I had the pleasure of working for people like Mary Robinson, the first female president of Ireland.
Nice, that's cool.
Which was, it was very cool, to put it lightly. It was really kind of a game changer,
Sure.
Getting to learn about leadership from somebody like that. But eventually I started my own consultancy over here that focuses on strategy and leadership advising across different sectors. So some of it is capacity building, some of it is landscape mapping when a business or an organization wants to influence a new area, an issue area, or work in a new way that they haven't before. And, through a round of unexpected events a few years back that kind of kicked me in the tail in multiple ways, I started thinking about this issue of not resilience in the traditional sense, which people mostly talk about in terms of bouncing back,
Sure.
but really transforming the challenges that I was facing, that my mom was facing at the time. I mentioned that because I co-wrote the book with my mom,
Right.
and developed the research with her. So it was very much a case of the challenges that I was facing, opening up new opportunities, and primarily to do this research in this way, and a new collaboration.
Sure. So what exactly is kind of the Type R, and how did you and your mom kind of come up with it, and then how did you guys work it into a book?
Sure. So Type R is a mindset, a skill set, and also an identity.
Okay.
So I say an identity in that I could ask you, are you a Type R person? Are you a Type R business? So Type Rs are essentially the resilient individuals, leaders, businesses, or even communities that turn challenges into opportunities, growth, new skills, innovation, what have you.
Sure.
And how do these people or these businesses become Type Rs? Well, a lot of it ties back to a mindset, a way of thinking, which at the most fundamental level is when something difficult happens, do you immediately catastrophize and want to shrink away and feel that, this is the beginning of the end? Or do you feel that you have the capacity to learn something from this and draw something from it? And many of these things are things that we never want to have happen.
Right.
They're not things that we invite, but that's the whole point.
Sure.
They have happened. So can we accept them? Can we draw something positive out of them? And so, that's the starting point, is how we frame it in the mindset. And again, that can be you or I losing a job. It can be a business facing more competition, or having their headquarters inundated in an unexpected flood.
Right.
So we're talking about a range of contexts. So those are the basics.
Sure. And I think though is at some point everybody will go through something like that, right? Or a handful of those, or many of them throughout kind of a lifetime and a career, right? And it's kind of how you handle it and kind of pull yourself through that is kind of, I think, majority of people that are successful pull themselves through kind of the hard times, right? Is that what you've kind of found at least?
Yeah, and you had asked how we came to write this book together. So, as I briefly mentioned, both my mom and I were female entrepreneurs working in different contexts, but we were supporting each other, and we were working in the financial crisis period or post-financial crisis. So the turbulence from that, which is big picture, many people were going through that, but it also becomes personal very quickly.
Sure.
So we were facing that. There was some family illness. I got hurt and had to stop work for a while. So, there were all of these challenges that we were facing at the individual and personal level, the business level, and then as part of this global picture. And we were looking for new ways to think and to get ourselves through this. But also we were seeing it in our clients, in our friends, in the leaders and businesses we were dealing with. And so we started to talk in supporting one another, but then also realized that there was a new contribution to make in terms of moving past the ways that we've traditionally thought about adversity. And this notion of bouncing back, which gets talked about so much, but in reality isn't, it's often a poor choice. It's either one, not available to us because we've changed by the time we've gone through something difficult, or the world has moved on. Everything is so fast-paced now that getting back to the past is really not possible. But also it's a waste of adversity. Why go through something really difficult or uncomfortable and not come out with something new, with a new strength, new insight, or an improved product, an improved way of being. So it's really trying to look at forward motion and growth, not bouncing back.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So how does somebody kind of go about becoming like a type R personality? Because I think it can be challenging. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm just, again, going to say type R is not a personality. It's a mindset, a skill set, and an identity.
Okay, that's fair. That's a better way to put it, yeah. Okay.
Well, I think part of it's that we were playing off the type A and B personality just because it's something that's familiar to people. Sure. But I think we get this sense that if you call it a personality, that it, one, only applies to a person, as opposed to a business or a community. But also it makes it sound like you either have it or you don't. And the reality is that we can learn this. We can grow into it. And, even my mom and I, as the people that have been working on this and developing it, some days we're great at it, some days we're not.
Sure.
There are parts of being type R that we're stronger at than others. And so, how do we start? Well, part of it is understanding what our default mindset is when things go wrong, or when we're facing challenges. And a lot of that is hard to do in the midst of a crisis or a really tough time. Because we don't have the distance that we need. So often it's about taking some space or thinking about this stuff if you can prior to finding yourself in the hot seat, and looking back. So when something difficult has happened in the past, can you remember what your first reaction was? Was it, oh no, this is going to flatten me, or, poor me, or... And it's not to say that if you have a negative reaction that, it's bad or that you're doomed, but it's just to be aware of what our starting point is, so that we can take that knowledge into the present and carry it into the future with us and catch our defaults. So when the next thing that's difficult happens, and again, this can be for ourselves or as part of a team or an organization's, whole strategy, can say, oh, okay, let's catch ourselves. We are veering towards being pessimistic about this, and that's understandable. We're really facing something tough. We don't want to deny that, but we fundamentally have the skills to get through this.
Right.
So let's band together. How do we find the resources, to either get the knowledge that we need, to get the financial resources, whatever the resources may be. So it starts with a mindset and being aware, but then we learn to build skills like adapting to our changing circumstances, continually learning from those circumstances, but also from the people around us or, different kinds of experts, leveraging support. And one that people really often relate to is trying to find a healthy relationship to control.
Okay, interesting.
And we can come back to that. But
sure.
Also having a deeper rooted sense of purpose, and then, actively engaging. So you can't be the ostrich with your head in the sand. You're not going to be able to adapt and make new things happen if you're kind of checked out. So, again, it starts with the mindset and then moves on to developing some of these skills. And those are the 6 type R skills that I've just mentioned.
Sure.
And we might already have some of those skills. Some of them may be stronger than others. But, a lot of it has to do with reflection, gaining perspective, kind of learning, and then taking that learning to change our behavior, seeing what happens from changing that behavior, and then adapting again so that you're creating kind of a feedback loop.
Sure.
And seeing what works. You could be learning from other people saying, hey, you lost a job before in the financial crisis. What did you do that worked, or how did you make it through? So, it can go from the very basic kind of emotional support to technical, depending on the circumstances. But these skills can really help.
Sure.
And
no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you.
Oh, I was going to say, no, I think that's actually really good advice, because I think for anything in life, I always find those like lists of like 10 things that successful people do every morning. It's like, well, sure, maybe like I'm not a morning person, so why would I force myself to wake up early? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. But there might be something on that list that I'm like, oh, I should really give that a shot, right? And it could work for me and it might not work for me, but you just kind of cherry pick things that work for other people or have worked for other people in, I think, good and bad situations, or kind of just everyday life. You're like, oh, I should really try that. And if it works, keep doing it. If it doesn't work, pick something else, right? Is that kind of a fair way to put it?
Yeah, and I think you've touched on something important, which is experimentation. So we, in the book, talk about the 6 stages of transformative resilience, or kind of turning these challenges into opportunities. And, first, you're living the status quo. Things are comfortable. It may be that you've got bad habits, or,
sure,
your lifestyle or your business is not the best, but you've become comfortable in that space. And all of a sudden something comes along and really disrupts you and throws you for a loop. And, you go through a period of real discomfort, of disbelief, having to come to terms with that. And eventually you reach a point where you start using it as a catalyst to ask new questions and to start testing out new behaviors. And so you were just talking about experimenting, which is so critical when you're in the process of kind of pivoting, creating next iterations of yourself or your business, or even, global solutions. So my background is in international affairs.
Right.
These type R skills do apply to the big global challenges. What happens when we have a mega storm that we haven't dealt with before?
Sure.
What kind of solutions can we present as businesses, as, mayors and city leaders, as communities? But there is a process of experimentation before you finally find what works and you create a new normal.
Sure. And
new behaviors and new ways of thinking before you get disrupted again, because there's always going to be a next disruption.
Sure.
But I'm with you. One of my biggest pet peeves are those listicles. And, all the business magazines love them, of like 30 seconds, how you can become a new you. And I actually think that it is an intellectual impoverishment of our business leaders and our next business leaders, because we're dumbing things down.
Yeah.
We need to be preparing people for increasingly complex circumstances and worlds, we need more emotional intelligence, we need more type R skills, and you can't spoon feed that to people.
Sure.
You have to say, look, you are a smart, capable person. You've got some fundamental skills. You can learn more. And that's not about saying, here, just do these, 10-second quick things that I've done, especially because a lot of this is an iterative process. Sure. And it does take reflection. So, what if I were to make the anti-listicle?
Sure.
The first thing I would say is get away from those quick answers, because a lot of the time they just, I think, take people in the wrong direction.
Sure. But I also think that the person that wrote that list had to iterate and try a bunch of things that didn't work for them to come up with the list of 10 things that do work for them. So it's kind of like, well, you got to the finish line that works for you, and now you're telling everybody to just skip their process and just do what you do. And it's like, well, it doesn't really work like that, right? At least I've got, you can't follow somebody else's path to success, because everybody has totally different means and backgrounds and history and, so it just seems kind of wild to me. But you touched on something that I want to go back to about kind of controlling a relationship. What did you kind of mean by that, and how does that kind of work?
So a healthy relationship to control, as opposed to controlling a relationship.
Okay.
The reality is that on one hand, we have to have some sense of control or influence over the basics of our lives, or we don't want to engage.
Okay.
Why would you bother to make an effort if it's not going to make a difference, or you're not going to influence any of the factors in your life or the outcomes?
Okay.
And in the midst of crisis or immense pressure, research has shown that people feel less stress if they have some sense of control.
Okay.
So that's important to have this floor, this basic level. And I have worked at this point in, I don't know how many different countries, but a number of developing countries. And in a poverty context, you see, poverty is really boiled down to people not having any influence over the basics of their lives. And so when a crisis comes along, they can't make certain choices because they don't have money, or they don't have political influence or what have you. So that's an extreme version of being without control. And you can imagine how anxious that would make you if things are happening to you, but you can't really maneuver. So you've got this floor, but often what happens for many of us that live in the West and, have a certain level of affluence and privilege is that we tend to overreach and try to overexert control, often over things that we won't ever be able to control. And so, that can show up in a number of different ways, including things like perfectionism, which then reduces our ability to collaborate with others because we feel it can only be done one way. We can only do it ourselves. But essentially, we're talking about, on one hand, finding ways to have a basic level of influence over your circumstances. And again, could be an individual, could be a whole business, but also being cognizant of the fact that there are things that will take place and on an increasing basis that you're not going to be able to influence or control in the immediate. So for instance, this past year, we just had numerous superstorms in the U.S. And other parts of the world. And those were supposed to be 1 in 1,000-year events.
Yeah.
But there were 4 of them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't want to say people don't have any influence, because collectively with things like climate change, we have to make better choices and better policy. But if you're a business in that moment that's in Texas, when a superstorm is hitting, you're not going to have control over certain things in that moment.
Right.
So, what can you do? Where can you put your energy to make sure that you're having some influence while not wasting your energy and spinning your wheels trying to control things that you can't? And in terms of things that we can't control, often a lot of the time we can't control other people's decisions or behavior, which can be really frustrating.
Sure.
But especially if you're used to kind of being a powerhouse and getting things done. But that's one area where we really try and have control and keep making efforts. we might be able to influence people or help them understand what our relationship can lead to, or a business partnership. But in some respects, one of the only things that we can fundamentally control is how we choose to see things. The lens through which we frame things, whether or not we choose to keep learning. And again, back to this mindset, are we catastrophizing, or do we see opportunity for something positive to come of it, even if it's just new skills or new lessons?
No, I think that's really good advice. And I think the thing that's interesting about I think what you're doing is you're getting people to kind of think about what they're doing and how they can kind of better themselves, right? No matter what they're kind of going through at the time. And I think people get so caught up in kind of the day-to-day kind of stuff, the kind of good and bad that happens throughout the day, that I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this myself, is like forgetting and kind of looking objectively back at it and being like, is it really as good as it is? Is it really bad as it is, or whatever, right? And then kind of saying like, how can I be better at this, or do this to try to get better at that? Like, I think that to me is kind of something that is kind of a constant thing, like you mentioned, but you need to kind of push yourself, I think, out of your comfort zone a little bit each and every day, right? So it's not so daunting to just like jump off the deep end and try something totally new. Sometimes you need to do that, but I think at the end of the day, like, just if you push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit further every day, you'll be surprised that in 6 months or a year, how far you've really come in an area where you struggled with, I think. Is that kind of a good way of putting it?
Yeah, and it can be a process of building skills over time. The Type R skills, in many respects, if you're talking about an organization, for instance, they provide almost the skeleton to then build upon in terms of analysis, behaviors, communications, the initiatives that you undertake, the products that you develop, how you choose to engage in the big global issues, whether it's financial crisis, climate change, economic inequality, tax policy, what have you. So, it does create this skeleton for a number of different things, but it is about gradually building new skills, new ways of doing things. Let me just give you a really quick example so that it's not abstract for people.
Okay, sure.
There's a fabulous entrepreneur that I had the pleasure of meeting named Frederick Hudson, and he is now one of the most successful African-American entrepreneurs. He's built a communications platform that helps keep inmates and family members in touch.
Very cool.
And he's gotten the support of Y Combinator. Right. He's been hailed as like a Forbes top innovator. But he had to learn about some of these skills in a really tough context. In his early 20s, after being honorably discharged from the Army, he started a business. He made a poor choice. He ended up in prison. And in that time, you don't have any control over your day-to-day basics, like when you eat, when you make phone calls. And you're essentially told that you're not going to amount to anything,
right?
From what Frederick has told me.
Sure.
And he had to say to himself, okay, well, what can I control? I can decide who I want to be as a person and what I want to accomplish. And I've hurt people, particularly his mother, who he's close to, by ending up in that situation.
Sure.
And he said, I really want to make a contribution. So he turned those 4 years into a self-taught MBA, and he found every bit of literature he could. Talking to the man is amazing.
Interesting.
But what does this mean for business? So he had to learn to adapt to his new environment. He had to learn to leverage support of different people and different resources. He had to find this healthy relationship to control, and in that circumstance say, what I can control is who I want to be.
Sure.
So a couple years later, he's running this business very successfully, and they have a security breach, and somebody starts making all these fraudulent accounts. and it's costing them a lot of money, and he has to make a quick decision.
Sure.
Well, he's human. He wants to shut down the international part of the business where the fraudulent accounts are coming from and try and control other people's behavior.
Sure.
But he steps back and he remembers, okay, first of all, I should leverage the support and the insight of my team and some of our colleagues like Skype that have been through this.
Sure.
Second of all, what can we control? Well, we can control our response rather than other people's behavior. And so ultimately, they went through a process. They came up with a tech solution of how to improve their system. He leveraged all this new knowledge. And the outcome was that he created a stronger product, a better business, a reputation for a better business because people heard that they were going through all of this.
Right.
But he gained huge amounts of buy-in from those in his startup who had treated him before like the one that had to deliver success. And all of a sudden, they were much more invested.
Sure.
So there was a whole transformation. And he's a social entrepreneur. So he's making an impact in the larger world through these Type R skills. And so I say that because I know we're going to run out of time here, but essentially Type Rs start with themselves. We build our own skills, our own mindsets, insights. We take that into our leadership, into our startups or our businesses, but also into the larger world. And Type Rs, we all have bits of it in us. Some of the most interesting Type Rs I've seen, they go back and they make a larger contribution. So there's a ripple effect.
Sure.
It doesn't stop just with, the listicle of how do I become successful in 30 seconds. Yes, we all are self-interested in some way, and it starts there. We have to be able to relate to it as individuals. But we live in a world with so much need for a larger social impact, for businesses that also deliver good along with profits. So I think that's one of the unique things about Type R that I would love for people to take away.
Sure. And yes, we are out of time, so maybe let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about kind of what you're doing and the book.
Yeah. So again, I'm Amma Marston. If you're interested in the book as well as taking a free online assessment, you can go to our website. It is I'm going to have trouble with this, www.type-r-resilience.com. So it's type-r-resilience.com. The book's also on Amazon. You can Google me, Amma Marston. But I'd love for people to, take a look, and I'd love to hear from people too about how this fits into their life, what they're struggling with, or the solutions that they've come up with in their own work, families, communities, businesses, what have you.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.